think you could let me off this leash, bro?
Absolutely not.
Logan Paul is an easy target, almost so easy that he's boring to talk about. Everyone is so ready to jump on this guy that there isn't much else to even comment on. Then he made a movie. Airplane Mode. I'm so fascinated by YouTuber movies because they're usually ungodly terrible. And I mean, this ain't breaking the mold or anything, but it isn't quite as bad as some of the other YouTuber movies I've talked about before. If I had to, I'd say it's slightly better than trash like the Smosh movie or the Fine Brothers' masterpiece, F the Prom, but still kind of worse than the original Fred movie. The fact I even have this metric is both kind of hilarious and really, really painfully sad. Anyway, how about we try and forget about all the baggage that comes with this guy and talk about what works and what doesn't with what is clearly a love letter spoof parody of the classic Jim Abrahams and David Zucker comedy Airplane, which is a film I feel like I bring up weirdly often. I guess it's because it's one of the only examples of a good spoof movie.
The movie is set to release this year, 2017.
Wait, what?
This year, 2017.
But this film came out in August 2019. I suppose the epic scale in such a big budget cinematic product needed more time in post, right?
You have a baby. You're supposed to have 7 of those, but, you know, taking care of business.
Obviously not, but if you remember that time Logan Paul filmed a vlog with a real corpse in the Japanese suicide forest, then it quickly becomes clear that the film was held back until he was a slightly less controversial figure.
Is this shit?
The history of delayed movies is already a pretty shaky one. Ugh. But when you also find out that the film is mostly conceived and written by the Paul brothers, those famous comedic writers, and its major selling point is that the film boasts the largest cast of social media influencers ever assembled.
And it stars 20 of the biggest social media stars in the world.
Then it's hard to have any expectations any lower than something that is usually considered low to the ground, like a crocodile. My expectations were as low as a crocodile. Speaking of assembling social media influencers though, in a weird way this film reminded me of the most famous assembly in pop culture as of late, the Avengers movies. Not because the content of the Avengers movies is anything like Airplane Mode necessarily, but more so the fact that if you try to watch something like Avengers Endgame without any prior knowledge of the previous movies, you'll kind of be a bit confused as to who everyone is and why you should care about any of them. I obviously don't watch Brittany Furlan, David Dobrik, King Buck, Lele Pons, or any of these goddamn Vine stars who are in the movie, so a large amount of the runtime had me scratching my head as to why they are spending so much time on these seemingly random people who are just strangers to me.
We didn't really have to ask these internet creators to go too far out of their comfort zone.
Right.
And we knew that we played to everyone's strengths, and that's why the movie is so great.
Ma'am, no twerking in my machine.
I wasn't twerking.
I'm just making sure.
Everyone in the movie seems like they're on stimulants of some kind. Not a second goes by before someone violently hurls themselves into some kind of pratfall, jumps around wildly, attacks each other, screams. The screaming especially gets on my nerves. Just because you're screaming doesn't somehow make it a joke. Do you want to calm down for a second? God, this film is actually exhausting to watch. The best way I can think of to explain it is that this film perfectly encapsulates how it feels to be 14 years old. You have too much energy, you think swearing all the time and being edgy is the absolute funniest, and the most important thing in the whole wide world to you is busting a nut. If I was able to take anything away from this movie, is that it really highlights how these people live in some kind of disconnected fantasy land that their wild success has fueled. Only people who are completely out of their goddamn mind would ever think that a project like this would be a good idea. And in a backwards sort of way, it kind of makes the movie inadvertently fascinating. Whereas previously mentioned YouTuber movies like Fred or the Smosh movie are mostly safe, forgettable, and just kind of boring, Airplane Mode is ironically the result of what would happen if you made a YouTube video that specifically goes against every single one of YouTube's content guidelines. It's full of stereotypical hateful content, non-stop nudity and sex, gore, violence, foul language, you name it, it's in there. Which was initially so confusing to me not being very familiar with the Paul brothers, because I just assumed that the only people who watched Logan Paul were around 12 years old, and that the film would pander to that crowd as a result and be safe and boring. But then suddenly it all clicked. Why else would any of these people be popular in the first place if they didn't appeal to the most lucrative and vast demographic of tiny, idiot 12-year-old babies who find all of this edgy garbage to be the funniest thing of all time?
There's nothing more I could possibly learn about your balls.
I probably would have loved this crap as a 12-year-old. It's the same type of manic, energetic, relentless humor as the very content that made them famous in the first place. So instead of being toned down by directors, writers, producers, and controlled by powerful production companies to make limp, easily digestible products that are marketable, these guys have been left to run completely rampant. And the end result is just a feature-length mental YouTube video / Vine that has been produced with slightly more people involved. I honestly would have no problem with this thing existing if they just didn't try to pass it off as something that it isn't. You know, a movie? Upload this somewhere and let people watch it for free, because as soon as you add a price tag and try to sell something as a product that is on the same shelf as actual professionals, then you open yourself up to a new level of scrutiny.
Oh, damn. My bad.
Airplane mode has no real story, and when it does, it's just stupid. And no, not in a good way.
Do you know how to drive a 767?
The plot is that Logan Paul wants to go to an influencer event in Australia so he can finally bang his online girlfriend, who happens to live there. He's also scared of flying, for some stupid reason. But the flight goes wrong and he has to save the day because whatever. It is so distinctly similar to Airplane at points that I really don't understand the point of it. Multiple times going as far as to pretty much steal jokes verbatim. They even updated the poster to look like it's a sequel to the classic movie, except this time the plane is dabbing. That is the worst shit I've ever seen. What are you doing? If I had to guess what their intent was, their goal was to try and modernize the same premise as the original with their unique social media slant, which is already such a terrible idea that should have been shot down instantly. But no, they doubled down so hard that most of the characters in the movie are just influencers playing exaggerated, or not exaggerated at all, versions of themselves.
And everyone plays an exaggerated version of themselves. So we didn't really have to ask these internet creators to go too far out of their comfort zone.
With the plot revolving around how they all use their phones so much that they make the plane go wrong and kill the pilots by electrocuting them. With all of this anchored around the most dull romantic comedy plot points of all time. The typical story of a guy who is pining for someone he thinks he loves, but in fact his true love was by his side all along. In this instance, a random person who happens to be sat next to Logan on the plane. Huh? Honestly, there isn't even much point focusing on the plot because it isn't important. The movie basically admits it itself. The real point of the movie is to be a comedy, to make you laugh. The plot is literally nothing more than a backdrop for the jokes. So how are the jokes? Well, I'm not a liar, so I ain't gonna lie to you guys. Surprisingly, I did laugh a fair few times. That Vine style of comedy is completely hit or miss and totally reliant on catching you off guard with mostly random nonsense humor. And when the film stays silly and nonsensical, it can actually be surprisingly over the top and funny. However, though, listen, before you get too excited and try to watch this film for yourself as if I'm endorsing it, just because it got a few cheap laughs out of me doesn't mean I think it's even remotely good as a movie. It's kind of like if you got a pizza that was covered in pineapple, aside from one single slice. Most of the pizza would be sickening and utterly inedible, but at least you could say, oh, at least there was one nice slice to spite itself. The jokes in the movie are all over the place, but let's talk about some of the best and worst examples. The slapstick pratfalls and physical humor ranges from being strangely committed to just kind of annoying. Are you okay? Some of the more wacky, absurdist stuff can be okay. Like when Logan has a conversation with his bottle of lotion, which I realize, like, it doesn't sound funny when I describe it, but I don't know, it just caught me off guard because I wasn't ready for what this film was going to do to me. But often it just goes for shock value more than anything clever.
I'm just racist. I do respect the queers, though.
Shock value's easy, and it's boring after a while. One of my favorite ridiculous moments was when, for no reason at all, a passenger has tiny arms and legs, I don't know why that got me, but it did.
Look at all this leg room. It's crazy.
There you go. But on the other end of the spectrum, Nick Swardson is in the movie. You know, that guy, Bucky Larson, that fucking comedic talent. You may know him from some of the worst films of all time. And surprise, surprise, he is pretty intolerable. He gets an entire B-plot where he finds a baby crawling around on the plane and adopts it on the spot, with the ongoing joke being that he squirts milk out of his nipples to feed it and is generally just disgusting, rude, and creepy around the child.
God gave me nipples, and I'll be damned if I don't use them, okay?
Which is something I do genuinely find kind of inappropriate and offensive about the movie. Multiple times children are used for edgy jokes.
Even though he ran off with that cheating whore, but you're so cute!
But these scenes are shot in a way where it seems impossible that they could have hid the abrasiveness from them. They're constantly saying horrendous things around babies and children.
Wherever the I want.
And multiple times I just felt uncomfortable because of the disturbing dedication to these gags. It's just something about kids being involved with something so crass that feels off and irresponsible to me. And in the complete inverse of Little Kiddies, the Paul brothers clearly think that old people doing it is the funniest concept. There are multiple jokes about it. The gross out stuff in particular is some of the most tiring, especially their obsession with incest for some reason. There are multiple jokes built entirely around it. It's really weird. And seeing as we're already talking about some of the more offensive stuff, obviously a lot of the humor is at the expense of various ethnic groups and stereotypes. I have to admit a couple of them were so over the top that they were kind of funny to me. The best one probably being when Logan thinks he's relating to this woman who's just told him that she's been cheated on by her boyfriend, and he idiotically says,
You know, I know what it's like to be cheated on. Yeah, this one time during midterms, this Asian girl kept looking over at all my answers. Which is ironic, you know, because she's Asian.
I kind of like how Logan is written as a complete dumbass. His character is such a moron, and he sells it beautifully.
She makes me snort?
What?
The thing about this edgy stereotype humor is that when it misses, it really misses. One of the worst cases being basically anything they have Anwar Jabawi do, which I don't even need to describe because here you go.
The script spoke for itself. Luckily, the script is great.
A lot of it is just so lazy. Like, wow, how creative to have the male flight attendant be excessively gay. That's inventive of you.
Luckily for you, the passenger in 2E just passed away, so I can upgrade you to first class if you like.
In fact, the entire gay angle of the movie is completely bizarre. Randomly, partway through the movie, it's revealed that Logan is able to read gay people's minds, and only gay people, mind you.
I'm gonna break you like a new pair of sneakers.
I can hear you.
No joke, that is one of the main plot devices they use to write Logan out of danger, and I guess it's loosely supposed to be a reference to The Sixth Sense? I don't know if that's reaching or not.
I hear gay people.
Is this some kind of reference to his YouTube content? I really don't know, but it comes out of nowhere and is bafflingly strange. A lot of the humor is mostly pointless like this, with little more than the most surface level value to it, all completely random strands that are barely related to one another. The thing I appreciate so much about a comedy show like Always Sunny is that yeah, it is full of a bunch of crass and abrasive humor, but it cleverly uses the exaggerated nature of it to mock and point out the absurdity in the people who genuinely act and believe the outlandish things the characters do. Here, you're often left questioning if this is supposed to be offensive for offensive's sake, or if they are supposed to be mocking people who act this way, or if the Paul brothers are just kind of dicks, which is made extra confusing because most of these people are playing themselves, so they just wind up looking like a bunch of insane assholes.
Dude, I am one. Like, social media stars, they have egos, they have their own agendas. It's like, oh, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. I sat them all down separately because you cannot get them together.
Team up on you.
Yeah, exactly. They'll team up on you.
The most obvious commentary in the movie is about racial profiling in airports, which is probably the most substantive humor in the movie, but it's not exactly subtle.
Oh, sweet Jesus. Definitely deported.
The lack of subtlety in general is one of the worst things about it to me. It's easy to scream and shout the F word and make race jokes and all this. But if someone was just able to reel these maniacs back a bit and control the insanity, there probably could have been a way to put a clever spin on the social media influencer angle. But these people probably have too much creative control and influence over the movie. I mean, it's literally written by the brothers, and subtlety's never been their deal. And we ain't even at the worst stuff yet. The absolute definitive worst jokes in the movie are are, surprise, surprise, anytime they reference another piece of pop culture, which I guess in a sense is the entire movie because it is just a reference to Airplane. But anyway, Nick Swardson has an annoying, completely pointless reference to The Lion King that doesn't even make any sense. The punchline and reference is completely irrelevant to what is being shown, and it's just embarrassing. And even despite this movie being delayed, some of the references to old YouTube videos are just bizarrely dated and clueless. Why is there a Leave Britney Alone joke?
Leave Britney alone!
Why is the FHR ITP thing referenced here? Why does the Hide Yo Kids guy have an extended cameo?
Hide your drugs and hide your liquors, cause we searching everybody around here.
Why is the main villain of the movie that Russian prankster who keeps saying that it's just a prank, bro? Talk about dead on arrival, Jesus Christ.
Just a prank!
Yet more evidence that random reference humor is the killer of all comedy. If the punchline is a reference that isn't grounded in anything even remotely relevant, chances are it's a shit, unfunny joke in the first place and shouldn't be in there.
This is the movie I wrote. It took 2 years to write.
But you know what? The biggest crime of all this movie commits is saying anime porn instead of hentai.
Your sister said you're looking at anime porn again.
They're such chads, they don't even know what hentai is. Idiots. As far as cinematic production is concerned, I mean, look at it. I've seen worse, but it ain't anything to write home about. The camera is used to get the job done, and very little else. The most interesting shot in the movie being a faked Wano where a slow-motion camera trucks along the plane, in a sequence so sexual I've had to blur everything, so this video isn't taken down or flagged. The visual effects are all fittingly YouTube tier. There's absolutely nothing to really call out that isn't hilariously obvious from a quick glance. Although in saying that, one of the cheapest aspects of the movie is the music, which sounds like... well, it sounds like YouTube stock music.
I don't think so.
The production is so YouTube tier that it almost seems intentional, or accidental. Honestly, the most professional aspect of the entire movie is Logan Paul's performance. He really applied himself to this shit.
There ain't nobody ready to go and get this thing, get me!
His energy, commitment, and enthusiasm is genuinely infectious at times. He clearly belongs in front of a camera. This guy has charisma. He's so cartoonish and over the top that he literally looks like a character design from The Incredibles in real life. I can withstand about 30 minutes of this movie before it really starts pissing me off, which is actually quite decent considering some of the awful shit I've talked about before, but it really is hard to defend or justify a lot of decisions here. You might be able to get something out of it if you have certain substances that can switch your brain off a bit, but I'd never praise this movie beyond calling it the bloated YouTube video that it is. It really is not surprising that this is what a bunch of ex-Viners think a movie should be like. As far as where it sits in the overall ranking list though, I'd sooner watch this again over most of the other films. So it's currently the 22nd lowest out of 69. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about Elf Bowling the movie, which won the popular vote of the last video, but I've been meaning to do something on this movie for a while, and I put it slightly ahead of Elf Bowling. I don't know if I'll do Elf Bowling next or cover the new Destiny expansion. I'll have to play it first and see what I think. Anyway, as I always say,
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.